first started studying Basquiat, in the late 90s, right, I'm looking at sort of reproductions only. And that differentiation between what's a drawing and what's a painting and what's pencil is very difficult to determine in reproduction. I think it's really interesting that these paintings continue to change, right, due to the oxidation and sort of the yellowing of the paper.
But it's not just yellowing, I have to say, when you saw it's different colors of paper.
Exactly.
So he even did this.
Yeah.
So he didn't just write with UV paint on, but he used this different kind of papers, which I found, for me, was a revelation to understand that.
Yeah.
But of course, it's a certain patina on them.
I think it all comes back to this idea of different types of vision, different ways of seeing. The more that I study this artist, the more I realize that it's about a deep sort of intellectual investigation into sort of meaning.
It's the abstraction of like blowing up the collage, blowing up all these things into little nano bits, which parallels our time. I mean, our times, the idea that everything is a sound bite or a visual bite or whatever. And so it's great to see these, they're almost like all background paintings without, because I've always been annoyed at the word icon in art. It's just everyone wants an iconic this and an iconic that. Someone said God was in the details. And I just think that these kind of things where the collage is broken up kind of reminds me of Zabriskie Point, the end of the movie, where the bourgeois house is blown up and all the detritus of Western civilization is just raining down in front of a slowly moving, slowed down film thing. I was lucky to be with Jean in Modena, the Mazzoli show, when he was doing drawings and drawing pads, and they were always neatly placed, cars and houses, things in a drawing. And then he'd say, well, I don't like this one, he'd throw it in the garbage. I don't like this one, he threw it in the garbage. And I said, no, hold on. He pulled it out of the garbage and said, this is a good part and that's a bad part. And I said, you should just cut out the good parts and reuse them in other things. It kind of led to this idea of collage, not that I'm trying to take credit for it, but it was just, save these things, don't throw them away. Some parts don't work, throw them away, And then later I was with him when he said to me one day, I've just made the most important breakthrough of my career. I didn't know what it was going to be. He said, I don't have to kill myself doing all these drawings. I can just copy them and then reuse them. And I'm like, oh, okay. I just thought it was a kind of, not a gimmick, but just kind of a way of saving time and saving energy.
But it's fascinating how the Xerox goes all the way through. It starts with the early work when he was a teenager that he sold on the street. So it was always something he was drawn to.
In the case of Basquiat, right, we have, in the contemporary criticism that's coming out as he's showing, right, it is sort of oriented towards, making a political statement that this is about oppression, this is about these things. It's all about race. And I think that we tend to read that onto certain artists, not to say that it isn't somewhat present, but it does sort of obliterate or obscure, right, sort of these deeper intellectual investigations that are happening.
I always thought that I'm big on the anti-iconic aspect of his work, which is popular with the collectors up until now. Now we're getting to a moment of research where we can see that the background of these things is actually more about nature, let's call it, as opposed to human beings, It's about ambience, like Brian Eno and the idea of music that doesn't program the person, but it's music that allows you to think while you're listening to it, So I think that these are some of the issues too, it's hard to tell people that the backgrounds are more interesting than the foregrounds, but it does have this relationship to other things, in terms of ambient art. Rap and hip hop doesn't come out of the last poets in this tradition of spoken. It comes out of the graffiti movement, which is like stealing public space, taking it back.
It's one of the few artists where you look at the movies, there aren't that many of Jean-Michel working and speaking, and Rauschenberg's one of the only artists he mentions who is an influence. And so in addition to all the other connections with the music of the time and punk, there is a through line going into contemporary art history that of course extends to Warhol, but Bob Rauschenberg and the rhythm of the works, and Rauschenberg used the transfers, and so, but that goes right into the Xeroxes.
Basquiat is copying himself, right? And I think that sort of gets back to your comment of sort of this repetition of copying oneself. Thinking about hip hop, yes, but also thinking about jazz, right? And thinking specifically about bebop and the reliance within bebop music on pre-composed figures in order to do very fast improvisations and live performance. When we listen to bebop improvisation, it seems disorganized and it seems spontaneous, but we know from musicologists that Charlie Parker, in composing every live improvisation, is relying on a set of about 170 pre-composed figures, so collections of notes that he's just ranging and rearranging, right, based on all sorts of things in tempo and chord structure. And I would sort of make an analogy to this compositional process in that, of sort of using these copies, right, and composing and rearranging them.